It started with John and myself and just some friends from college. And I remember we sat around a breakfast table at some greasy spoon and we kind of said, what do we want this church to become? And at the end of that conversation, we said if it could be anything, we had this kind of threefold vision. We'd love for it to, phase one, be an impact church. And then phase two, we'd love for it to be a reproducing church. And then we said eventually, and this one felt almost audacious, we said if God would really bless it, we would love for it to be a catalyst for a movement of reproducing churches.
We wanted to be an impact church, but our mission really was helping people find their way back to God. And we felt like the best way to do that was to help people get connected to small groups. We actually had small groups before we ever even had celebration services on the weekend. I think in the beginning we had more small groups than we actually had people. And so the five of us, we would travel to each person's small group, and we'd have these little icebreaker kind of opening questions. And I remember pretending that we'd never heard the responses before until that night, when in reality we'd heard it probably the previous 2 or 3 nights. We made a lot of mistakes, and we had no money, we had really no people. But I think one thing that we really did that was smart, that was simple, was connecting people into small groups. And I think that did have an impact.
When we thought about being a reproducing church, I think initially we always thought in terms almost exclusively of starting new churches. That shifted when a couple guys started coming to community, and one of them in particular was really struggling with his marriage, and his secular counselor actually said, why don't you get some kind of spiritual component to your life? And so he started showing up at community. Well, we fast became friends. I invited him to my small group, even asked him to host a small group. It wasn't long before he became a Christ follower. Got a chance to baptize him and his friend and their wives and several other people in that group. But I remember a question they asked me. They were both real estate developers, and they said, this experience of community, how can we get that into the properties we're developing across the Midwest? I said, I don't know. Well, as we began to explore that together, what came out of that was the opportunity to actually start a location at the heart of a brand new community that they were developing. They would build the community center, they would build all the components to go around it, and we could actually have a site there. Well, at first we thought about moving the whole church there, but then the more we talked about it, what if instead we just kept the existing church in this school we were meeting, but then start this second site over here? We'd never heard of multi-site, but next thing you know, here we were, one church with 2 different locations, and we had become this reproducing church.
Actually, we went from 2 locations to 3, and then 5, and then 7, 9, and now we have 11 locations all over the Chicagoland area, and we don't have any plans to stop anytime soon. So we were an impact church, a reproducing church, but I think our first sort of baby step towards what it might mean to actually be a movement of reproducing churches was when Dave, our student ministry director at the time, approached Dave and myself, and he said, you know, I really think that God's laid it on my heart and given me a vision to plant a church in Denver. Well, at that time, we were a really tight, relatively small staff, and just figured we'd all do ministry together forever. We were together for a long time, loved the staff, had just a super kind of spirit of camaraderie among ourselves. And so when Dave approached us, at first we actually were a little bit ticked off because we wanted it to stay that way. We figured we'd always be together. But I remember Dave went out to Denver and began to explore some possible sites, met with some pastors, actually came back and already was committed to having $100,000 to go towards this church plant up front. And at that moment, we realized, yeah, this is a God thing, and that Dave needs to go and start that church in Denver. And as a matter of fact, when he came back at one of our leadership community gatherings, we looked at our leaders and said, not only do we believe that Dave needs to go to Denver and start this church, some of you need to go with him. And over 30 people actually went from the Chicagoland area out to Denver to help start that church, which now is helping lots of people find their way back to God in that area.
Not only did people move out to Denver, but then we had a bunch of people that moved to New York to start a brand new church, and then to Boston and Detroit, and then several cities all across the country. And the next thing you know, we had this thing called the New Thing Network. Our dream is to have eventually 200 locations in Chicago that are part of Community Christian Church. Our dream for our New Thing Network is to continue to double the number of churches every year for the next several years, and to see this become the kind of movement that we've dreamed of. Currently, we're now at a place where we have 6 different networks that include over 50 different churches that are both nationally and international churches. When I think back about our dream of being an impact church, and then a reproducing church, and then if God would bless it, a movement, it's kind of cool to think that it all just started with a bunch of friends.